As the Orioles continue to deal with injuries, they need some of their bench guys to step up, and Ramon Urias has certainly done that recently. But they also need to continue bringing in reinforcements like Nick Anderson, Forrest Wall, and others. And we will get to it all coming up on this live episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is, well, if you're watching live on the YouTube channel, it's Wednesday, August 28th. But if you're listening on your favorite audio platform, it is Thursday, August 29th, 2024. And welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on this episode, we're going to break down some of the big news from Oriole land over the past day or so. We'll talk about Ramon Urias, another huge swing for him to really win the game for the Orioles over the Dodgers on Tuesday night. He has just been red hot in the second half. What he has done to be a perfect fill-in, and quite honestly, has been producing better than Jordan Westburg was at third base in this stretch. Then we'll chat a bit about the Orioles roster moves and news. Got some tough injury news on Jorge Mateo. We know his season is done, but the Orioles have brought in some reinforcements, a new reliever in Nick Anderson, a new bench player in Forrest Wall, and some other moves we will all get to here on this live edition of the pod, which is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. So thank you for joining us here on this Wednesday evening, about 90 minutes from first pitch in Game 2 between the Orioles and the Dodgers. If you haven't been super tuned into the podcast this week and wondering why is Connor going live shortly before a game is starting, well, as I've mentioned, because of just my work schedule, I work a separate full-time job outside of hosting this podcast. Because of the work schedule, because of 3 10 o'clock games in a row on the West Coast during the week, it is pretty much impossible for me to stay up for a whole game, record, edit, and post an episode, and then go to bed and get enough sleep to wake up and go to work. So because of that, for this week, for the what are essentially the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday episodes, but we'll go live with them Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday night of this week. Going to be talking a bit about the series. Like, we'll talk a little bit about what happened on Tuesday night, but more so other Orioles news and notes to get to. Got to a live mailbag episode last night. Make sure you go back and check that one out. Today's episode, we've got some Orioles news and notes to certainly get to. And if anyone does have any questions about the O's, any comments, you can still, if you're watching live, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel and leave your comments here in the chat. Might get to a few of them as we go through the podcast. But let's start with the big news from on the field from the last day of the Orioles, and that is what was a gigantic win for the O's, beating the Dodgers 3-2 on Tuesday night in Game 1 of this series. Now, on these episodes, I'm not going to go my full 5 things you need to know because, again, for a lot of people, by the time you listen, there'll already be another game after that is played. But I want to, shout out the Oriole bullpen for going 4 2/3 innings scoreless, holding a 3-2 lead the entire time on Tuesday night. Cole Irvin, it's only 4 1/3, but kept the Orioles in the game against the Dodgers lineup. Shout out to him for doing that. And does Brandon Hyde get any credit? A lot of people like to knock him down for decisions. Does he get any credit for the perfect bullpen maneuvering to get through and win that game and have the Orioles only allow 2 runs despite Cole Irvin not even finishing 5 innings against one of the best offenses in baseball? Great night for Brandon Hyde as well. Orioles win the game. And the big moment in that game Tuesday was Ramon Urias' 2-run homer in the 5th off of our old friend Jack Flaherty, flipped the score, put the O's up 3-2, and that is where that game finished. And these stats I'm going to talk about are through play Tuesday. Will not include, obviously, Wednesday night's game as I'm here live before it starts. But Urias has been a revelation, a 113 WRC plus for Ramon Urias, and that is this season. That is over the entire season. That's not just, we got a little hot lately. No. This is the entire season for Ramon Urias, and that is with what was a horrendous April. And he wasn't really playing every single day back then. He was playing a little bit. These O's still had a healthy Westburg. They had Holiday in there for a while. They had Jorge Mateo in there for a while. Urias wasn't playing every day, but he was terrible. And then he just turned it on. And since May 1st, after that bad April, he's got a 133 WRC plus. He has been 33% better than league average as a hitter since May 1st. That is a good chunk of the season. We are almost at September 1st at this point. It has gone way under the radar how good Ramon Urias has been. And I know that his defense has certainly taken a step back. He is not the defender he was at third base when he won the Gold Glove there in 2022. He's still certainly passable, certainly playable. I would still call him overall a slightly plus defender at third. He's not a Gold Glover anymore. The eye test shows you that, and the advanced stats, they both kind of agree on that with Urias, but he's still better over there than Kobe Mayo. That's one of the reasons why he still got all this playing time. But for Urias, like, he is filling in perfectly for Jordan Westburg. The last time we saw Westburg was on July 31st. That's when he got hit by that pitch. He went down. Westburg has a 129 WRC plus on the season. Urias a 133 since May 1st. So what I can tell you is he's been just as productive at the plate as Westburg. Now, with Urias's defensive step back, I would still take Westburg over Urias defensively at third base, but it's not a big enough gap where you can't say what Urias has done has, and this is going to sound a little cruel, has made the Orioles not totally miss Jordan Westburg. Now, when Westburg gets back, it is his job at third base, no question about it, and hopefully he comes back at least at some point in the regular season and is ready to go fully healthy by the postseason. But what Urias has done is nothing short of honestly incredible. And at worst for Urias, I mean, he's certainly going to be on this team through the rest of the year. He's going to be on the postseason roster to be a weapon. He's earned himself a roster spot in 2025 for this team. And there are other questions like, okay, how does he kind of fit into this roster? And that's certainly a big question that you'll want to ask. But the other question is, like, what is he doing differently throughout the season that has made him swing the bat better and better? Well, again, if you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you'll see this chart right here. This is courtesy of Baseball Savant and StatCast. This is Ramon Urias's average exit velocity by month in the 2024 season. We're starting down at around 84 miles per hour in April. That is terrible. Then he's gradually climbing. He gets all the way up to about 89 in June. Then he kind of plateaus out. And then in August, we're up at 91.6. That is an elite average exit velocity. And that was what used to happen for Ramon Urias, especially in 2022 when he was playing every day. He would hit the ball really, really hard. He just would hit it on the ground so often that he just didn't get enough hits out of it. When he would elevate the ball, that's when he would produce. Well, he's elevating the ball a little bit more as well. He's hitting the ball hard. He's barreling it. He's taking good swings. And he's a really productive, like, number 7 or 8 hitter in the Orioles lineup right now. And that has been huge with the absence of Jordan Westburg. The other thing with it is when Westburg does come back, instead of saying, okay, Urias is on the bench and we're never going to use him again, you have a much more useful depth piece on your bench with Urias going into the postseason. Even if Jordan Westburg is healthy, it makes this Orioles team even better and even deeper going into the playoffs. And that is very, very exciting as well. And the other thing is for Urias when it concerns 2025 is that he might have a little better runway to a playing spot because Jorge Mateo might miss some of next season. The news comes out on Wednesday that Mateo, who's been out for a while now since he took that nasty injury in Miami to his elbow colliding with Gunnar Henderson on a ground ball, the Orioles announced on Wednesday that Mateo actually got basically Tommy John surgery with the internal brace on his non-throwing elbow. So it is on his left elbow, which is really, really good news compared to it being his throwing elbow. And you don't see nearly as often position players getting that surgery, but that injury was nasty. It looked like it dislocated. I'm sure there was a lot of structural damage in there, which is why he's getting this surgery. So he is done for the 2024 season. We will not see Jorge Mateo again this year. Now, for position players, especially when it's your non-throwing elbow, it's more about just getting the swing back and the hitting. It doesn't hurt as much on the throwing. We saw Bryce Harper return pretty early in the following season when he had this injury a couple of years ago. So there's a chance Mateo could be ready for opening day. I wouldn't bet on it. I would say he's probably going to miss some chunk of time early in the 2025 season. But 2025 is Mateo's final year before he hits free agency. So kind of a tough break for him as well to have this injury. But I'll tell you right now, no matter what the Orioles do with this roster, especially if there's a question about Mateo on opening day. Ramon Urias has an opening day roster spot, I think, next year, unless something goes very wrong for him in the offseason. He is kind of securing himself a spot, which is definitely huge for him. Now, with knowing Mateo won't come back in September, that does open up another potential spot on the roster for a hitter. And you could think, okay, is maybe Heston Kjerstad that guy as he hopefully comes back from his concussion? Well, Brandon Hyde did give an update before Wednesday's game on Kjerstad, and it wasn't much. He said Heston is ramping up baseball activities, but unfortunately, there is still no timetable for Heston Kjerstad's return. It's not the most surprising news in the world. It's going on the IL 2 different times with concussion symptoms. That is not anything to mess around with. You want to make extra super sure that Kjerstad is okay before you are bringing him back to the field. And what that tells me is I wouldn't be super surprised if Kjerstad does not appear in a game again this year. And instead, he just kind of makes sure he's getting himself right and comes back for opening day in 2025. So another guy who maybe could be off the shelf for the Orioles as well. But what they did do on Wednesday was bring in a position player who's certainly not going to be any kind of everyday player for the O's, but on waivers, the Orioles claimed the outfielder Forrest Wall, who could at least help them fill a Jorge Mateo type role on the bench for the postseason. I'll tell you why they made the move and what the kind of surprising corresponding move was for the O's. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Liquid IV. When you're taking in America's pastime, don't forget to hydrate with Liquid IV's Popsicle Firecracker flavor, a surefire summer hit. Get hydrated with electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients from the #1 powdered hydration brand in America. Because baseball and summer, well, they go together like Liquid IV and indulgent hydration. Now, for me, I'm always drinking water, even though this is a coffee mug here. I've got water in it. I'm drinking water all day, but I still need a little extra hydration, especially like a day like today on Wednesday in Baltimore. I mean, reaching over 100 degrees with the heat index, I need a little extra help with the hydration. That is where Liquid IV and their great flavors come in. All you do, you tear, you pour, and you live more. One stick plus 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. So no more thirsty summers when you indulge in hydration with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Gametime. Now, Gametime, one of the best places to go, maybe the best place to go and buy tickets to any event, including Orioles games. But Gametime, they have a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You want to maybe go to a game next week. The White Sox are coming into town. O's with a big chance to sweep one of the worst teams in Major League Baseball history and make up some ground, or maybe by then, hopefully, extend their lead in the AL East. You want to go to Gametime to get those deals. They've got all-in pricing on the app, so they don't hide the fees. You are seeing what those fees are before you get to checkout. So just check out Gametime. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. So we're back here on a live episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Thank you, everyone who has jumped in here and started to talk a little bit about some roster moves that are not going to move the needle incredibly for this Orioles team this year, but I think improves the floor. And that's kind of been the series of moves that the O's have made over the past month or so, really since the trade deadline flurry ended. And even during the deadline, it's not like they made the big splash, although Zach Eflin, I think, was an amazing move, and hopefully he comes back soon. But I do think that the moves they're making, these lesser bullpen guys to kind of fix up the middle part of the pen, these bench guys, they're just trying to find the right mix. And they tried that again on Wednesday, making a waiver claim. As the Orioles claimed outfielder Forrest Wall off waivers from the Miami Marlins. Now, who is Forrest Wall? Well, he used to be a top prospect. If you would have said the name Forrest Wall about 5 years ago, people would have got really, really excited because he was formerly a first-round pick of the Rockies. He went through the Toronto system for a while, and people really, really liked Forrest Wall at one point. Then he kind of fizzled out a bit at AAA and is more of a post-hype guy now. He is 28 years old. He's a left-handed hitter. He plays the outfield. He was drafted as a second baseman and hasn't played as much of that in the majors. He's been more of a left fielder and right fielder who's played a lot of center field in AAA as well. But Forrest Wall did make his big league debut with the Atlanta Braves last season, and he played in only 15 games. It wasn't much at all. He did hit 462. Now, that was only 15 plate appearances, but he made the most of what he could do. He came back with Atlanta this year. Again, didn't play too much, 32 plate appearances, got DFA'd, was picked up by the Marlins, played in 3 games for the Marlins, didn't do much of anything, didn't really have a chance to do much of anything. And then the Marlins put him on waivers as well. And that is where the Orioles jumped in. Now, he's only got 50 big league plate appearances. He has hit 311 in those 50, so that's good to see, but not a whole lot of big league experience. He did have 231 plate appearances with Atlanta's AAA team this year, and he hit 279 with a 112 WRC plus. So he's been somewhat productive at the plate. And also a fantastic runner. StatCast has him 89th percentile in sprint speed. Basically, in layman's terms, he's one of the fastest players in Major League Baseball. And when you learn that Jorge Mateo just had elbow surgery that's going to take him out for the rest of the year and guarantee that he will not return to the Orioles in 2024, you kind of want at least that option to have that speedster off the bench who can pinch run and change a game in the postseason. I think if Jorge Mateo would have come back, that would have been mostly his role for this Orioles team. But if he's not going to come back, maybe Forrest Wall could be that guy. Now, he's only played left field and right field defensively in the big leagues, but he's played a whole lot of center field in AAA. So I think he's at least somewhat trustworthy at that position. And even in small sample size, his defense in the outfield, the big leagues, has graded out really, really well. So he's a good defender, a good runner. And although he hasn't gotten a lot of chances, he's at least hit a little bit when given the chance if you absolutely have to at the big league level. Now, Forrest Wall is not going to step in and take over a huge role, and he does have options. So the Orioles claimed him, and they immediately sent him to AAA Norfolk. So he's not even on the big league roster at this point, but he is on the 40-man, which makes him postseason eligible if the O's want to go that direction. And basically, I think the O's could call Wall up at some point in September. Maybe he is the extra September call-up that the Orioles get on September 1st. But more than likely for Wall, maybe they bring him up right at the end of the season and they just say, hey, you are our pinch runner and defensive replacement, and that is it. And that is the only way they use him in the postseason. It's been done before. Remember Terrence Gore with the Royals. Remember Quentin Berry with a lot of teams, including the Orioles at one point. They would just get added to teams late. Billy Hamilton had this role for a little bit. They'd get added to teams late in the season. They'd come up to the roster right at the end of the year, and they'd just be a pinch runner for big moments in the playoffs. If the Orioles feel that they are healthy enough to carry a player on the roster who's just going to pinch run, Forrest Wall is here to be that guy. Now, with that, he could also come up a little before that. You know, Levon Soto is here with Ryan Mountcastle in the IL. Maybe Wall is a better option than that for your bench, so he could come up sooner. But with that move, the Orioles did have a full 40-man roster, so they had to make a roster move off the 40-man to clear a space. And unfortunately, it's kind of a fan favorite. Dylan Tate was designated for assignment on Wednesday to make room on the roster for Wall. Now, my first reaction was, Dylan Tate, come on. I mean, I know it hasn't been his best year, and he spent a lot of the year in AAA coming back from injury, but there's got to be someone worse on that 40-man to DFA. But when you really look into it, in terms of depth guys that the Orioles are going to want to have around to potentially use in September or in the postseason, you kind of go down the list of the hitters and the pitchers, and especially if you're looking at the pitchers, there's really 2 options to DFA for this move. And it was Dylan Tate and Brian Baker. Now, I personally probably would have let go of Brian Baker before I did Dylan Tate. Both were currently in the AAA Norfolk bullpen. But the fact that Baker has pitched in way more games at the big league level this year, has been on the big league roster for a lot more time than Tate has, tells us that the Orioles just trust Brian Baker more than they do Dylan Tate. And if they had to use one of them in the postseason, that wouldn't be great. But if they had to, I think Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias would choose Brian Baker. Their actions have shown us that at this point. And for Tate, it's just been a tough year. He had a great, 3 years in the O's bullpen when the team was bad. He was basically Brandon Hyde's most trusted reliever. Then he had just the weird elbow and forearm issues. We never knew exactly what the injury was. He never got surgery, but he missed the entire 2023 season. He comes back. He's on the roster early in the year. You can tell the velocity's down. It's kind of fluctuating. It's not the same Dylan Tate. He goes back and forth to AAA a few times. And his numbers were good in AAA. He had like a 2 ERA. His numbers were pretty solid in his few chances at the big league level this year as well for Dylan Tate. Like, it wasn't like he was terrible. He threw 33 innings for the Orioles with a 4.59 ERA. It's not great, but he also had a 2.16 ERA in AAA. Really, the issue is his velocity just has not returned. He was 94, 95 with his sinker before the injury. He's basically been 92 miles an hour in the big leagues and in AAA with that sinker. And although his sweeper and his changeup have looked better this year, if that fastball isn't playing and at that velocity, it just doesn't get hitters out like it did at 94, 95, he's not as effective a pitcher. Now, I really hope Tate clears waivers and stays in the organization. If he does clear waivers, he has the chance to elect free agency. But if he does that, he'll lose the rest of his $1.5 million guaranteed salary. So I think he'll probably stick in the Oregon, stay in AAA. I hope he does. I really like Dylan Tate. When he's on and healthy, I love watching him pitch. Who knows if he'll be healthy again? He's already 30 years old, but he's been a huge part of this Orioles team for a while. That had to be a tough move for the O's to make, but I do hope that Dylan Tate can stick in this bullpen, or at the very least stick in this organization and be depth for this Orioles pen. But speaking of depth for this Orioles pen, we got one more move to get to coming up next. The Orioles signed another veteran reliever who's probably going to be on the big league roster in a couple of days. And I mean, they're kind of throwing darts and seeing what sticks, because despite the great performance Tuesday, the bullpen has not been amazing. Can they find a guy to break through? And maybe is Nick Anderson that guy? We'll talk about that to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by PrizePicks. To me, the most fun and exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. How do you play it? Well, all you do is you pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money at PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. And if you sign up today, you get $50 instantly when you play with $5. So the NFL season's coming up. You just take a look at players on the NFL field and pick more or less on the stats that PrizePicks gives you. So Tyreek Hill, will he get more or less than 90.5 yards in week 1? You just pick more or less. If you get it right, you win cash when you put together some of these stat lines. It's really quite simple. It takes like a minute to make an entry. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. That's at PrizePicks. Run your game. So to finish things off here, do want to talk a little bit about Nick Anderson. He is kind of the newest addition to this Oriole bullpen, at least in a couple of days. Orioles, as it was reported on Tuesday, have signed right-handed pitcher Nick Anderson to a minor league deal. Now, the next question is, who is Nick Anderson? Well, he is a 34-year-old right-hander who's been in the major leagues with 4 different teams since 2019. Came up with the Marlins in 2019, was traded to the Rays, and the Rays turned him into an absolute bullpen weapon in 2019. He had a 42% strikeout rate and a 7% walk rate that season in 65 innings. It was absurd what Nick Anderson did. Then he followed up in the shortened season in 2020 with the Rays. Now, it was only 19 games because, again, shortened COVID year, and he was injured for some of it. He had a .55 ERA in those 19 games in 2020. Anderson famously, though, had kind of been run into the ground by the Rays and was the guy that Kevin Cash put in when he pulled Blake Snell too early in the World Series that year, and that kind of cost the Rays potentially a chance at that World Series. But the stuff had always been great, but the Rays kind of ran him into the ground. And in 2021, he started to get injured, and he stayed injured for a while. I mean, this is a guy with 158 big league innings, a 3.18 ERA, a 32% strikeout rate, and a 7% walk rate. Those are elite career numbers for a reliever. But he had a partial tear in his elbow ligament. He missed most of the 2021 season, kept putting off surgery. And then finally in October of 2021, he said, all right, let's get the surgery. He returned late in 22 in AAA with the Rays, but didn't get back to the big leagues until 2023 when he kind of resurfaced with the Braves and had a pretty good year. 35 games, a 3.06 ERA out of the bullpen. Not too shabby. Ended up signing with the Royals this year, and it went a little downhill. Remember, he gave up a walk-off homer to Jordan Westberg earlier this season. With the Royals, 37 games, 35 and two-thirds innings, a 4.04 ERA, 5.07 FIP, and a strikeout rate of 19% to a walk rate of 10%. It just did not look like the Nick Anderson of old in that Royals uniform. It looked like a combination of age, he is 34, and the injuries he has suffered just had kind of gotten to him. So the Royals released him. They're a playoff team. They're sitting one game out of first place in the Central. They couldn't really afford to throw Nick Anderson. And the Dodgers said, this guy intrigues us. Let's sign him to a minor league deal. And he only pitched in like 4 or 5 games in AAA with the Dodgers, and the Dodgers didn't give him a roster spot, so they released him as well. But he kind of revamped himself a little bit with the Dodgers. Now, generally, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you can see here the pitch mix for Nick Anderson. Sorry, it's a little small on the screen, but the pitch mix for Nick Anderson via Baseball Savant. It's curveball, sinker, four-seamer, and changeup. The curveball is a pitch he's gone to almost 50% of the time this year. That is mixed in the sinker and the four-seamer and then a little bit of changeup for him. But what the Dodgers did is said, hey, we don't love your sinker. We like your four-seamer. We know it's been hit a lot this year, but we're going to have you throw it more. And they got somehow him to up his velocity. With the Royals, he was more 93 to 94. He was 95, 96, up to 97 in AAA with the Dodgers, and still with solid command and still with that really good curveball. And the pitch that intrigues me is the changeup. He's only thrown it 34 times this year, but he gets huge swing and miss when he throws it. I would love to see him become more four-seam, curveball, changeup, maybe get rid of the sinker and go to that attack plan that he was clearly working on with the Dodgers. Now, the Orioles brought him in on a minor league deal, but Roch Kubatko did some reporting about how he's probably going to be up in the next couple of days. And that's because to be eligible for the postseason roster, you have to be on a team's 40-man roster by September 1st. So we're at August 28th. He's got a little bit of time to do that. The Orioles are probably just going to call him up to the big league roster and at least give him a shot and see if he can pan out. Because if he does, he becomes eligible for the postseason. And if he doesn't, well, you hope you get, Grayson Rodriguez and Zach Eflin and Jacob Webb and Danny Coulombe back at some point later this year where you're going to have less bullpen spots anyway. And Nick Anderson, who has struggled at times this year, would become expendable. But he's another one of these guys where it's like low risk, potentially high reward because he's had such good numbers at times in his career. He's pitched a lot in the postseason with the Rays as well, which certainly helps. Maybe he can be a guy like a Colin Selby, like a Birch Smith at times, like a Matt Bowman is turning into for the Orioles, where they can kind of find him on this minor league deal, fix a couple of things, call him up, and have him get some key outs because the Orioles bullpen, despite that Tuesday night, is having its struggles. They've got their injuries. Maybe Anderson could be the guy to help. So if he does get called up by Saturday, let's say, to make him postseason eligible, if the Orioles feel Zach Eflin is ready to come back, we haven't heard anything yet, but Eflin would be eligible on Sunday to come off the injured list and pitch again. If Eflin's ready, maybe you DFA Cole Irvin on Saturday, and then you bring up Anderson for a day, and then you start Eflin on Sunday. Or maybe you option Cade Povich down after he starts on Thursday, and then you bring up Nick Anderson in his place, and then you bring back Zach Eflin maybe on Tuesday in Povich's next spot to start. Or if you still don't know when Zach Eflin's going to be back and it's going to be a reliever to go down, Birch Smith does have options, and he has had some struggles, so maybe a little reset in AAA would help Birch Smith, and you could replace him with Nick Anderson. Those are all definitely some options for the Orioles here as they try to just, add some more of these depth relievers. But I did want to take a couple of minutes here at the end just to jump into the comments, see if we got any questions to get to. Here's a question from Justin. Gut call, is Forrest Wall a pinch run only pickup? Probably, Justin. That would be my gut call, as I talked about there. Let's see. Ian with a question. Outside of the obvious, the Yankees and the Twins, there's actually the final 2 series of the year for the Orioles. What remaining series do you think will be the hardest and the easiest? Well, if you can count the current series they're in, I think most definitely it is 3 games at the Dodgers. The team playing like the best team in baseball right now is probably the hardest. The easiest is simple. That's at home against the White Sox next week. If I can't count this Dodgers series for the hardest, I'm going to say at Detroit, September 13th to 15th. The Tigers are playing really great baseball right now. They just went over 500. That's a series I would watch out for. The Orioles actually have 6 games left with the Tigers. They're playing really good baseball. Do not sleep on that team. Let's see. Hunter with a question here. In your opinion, is Mayo a future first baseman, as in Kobe Mayo? I think it's possible. I think the Orioles are still going to try him at third base next year. But if you think about the O's roster in 2025, Westberg at third base, Henderson at shortstop, Holiday at second, that's pretty much locked in. I think the most flimsy guy in the infield is Ryan Mountcastle's future with the Orioles. That is a right-handed hitting first baseman. That could be the easiest place for Mayo to slot in on this team next year. So there's a really good chance he could be playing first base. Another question from Hunter. Can Mateo run with that elbow? In theory, yes, but if you're getting surgery like that, you don't want to risk anything happening out there. That's why you bring in Forrest Wall. If you just want that pinch runner, he can be that guy. Shout out to Chuck here. Connor, the painting behind you. I know the dude wearing the O's jersey. Yes, you absolutely do. That is Chuck back there in the painting. That is a Leo Kale special back there that has been in my background for a while here. Ian with a comment. Yankees are losing in the 7th. Yes, they are. Shout out to the Nationals again. It is Nats 5, Yankees 2 in the top of the 8th inning. Nats bullpen is not good. We need 6 more outs from this Nationals bullpen. Aaron Judge is leading off the 8th. Come on, Nats bullpen. Let's see. A couple more questions here. David with a question. Could Kobe Mayo be moved to a corner outfield and first base platoon style, or do you think third base is his future? I talked about it a little bit. Eric Longenhagen of Fangraphs has always talked about how he thinks Kobe Mayo is like a future right fielder. I think if they re-sign Santander with the fact that Heston Kjerstad's in the mix, I don't know if Mayo becomes an outfielder on this Orioles team with this ballpark. I think it's more likely that he is a first baseman who can play a little third base, maybe in the mold of Vladimir Guerrero Jr., where he came up as a third baseman, and then the Blue Jays were like, the defense is just not there. They moved him to first, but we've still seen Vlad sprinkle in some starts at third base over the years just to keep up that versatility. I think that is definitely a possibility with Kobe Mayo. Thanks for bringing in the questions. Thanks for joining us for another live episode. Again, we'll be back tomorrow night. That'll be the final episode of the week. We'll get to any further Orioles news and notes. We'll talk a little bit about, if it goes well, tonight's game between the O's and the Dodgers. This would be a very nice time for Corbin Burnes to turn things around. It has not been very good for him lately. He's going up against Walker Buehler, who has also been pretty terrible since he returned from the injured list for the Dodgers. So if both these pitchers keep their current form, we could see a high-scoring affair at Dodger Stadium, but hopefully this is the game that turns Corbin Burnes around. And hey, if the Nats can get 6 more outs, the O's are going to have a chance to jump back into first place tonight. But again, we will be back tomorrow for one more episode this week. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.